But the nurturing will come when it's how you deal with each other. So I always like to give a preview, especially because this is for young professionals. I always like to remind the young professionals that, subhanAllah, when it comes to your work life, for example, you're never going to have someone in your workplace that you're like always like, you might have some people that are easygoing, that are easy to deal with, but you will also come across people that will really, really test your patience, that will actually get to you. And again, don't get me wrong, I made that disclaimer last time as well, but there's only a limit as well that you can handle. And so it's almost like recognizing it as well. The moment that you do feel that, okay, this is actually affecting me mentally, this is actually keeping me away from getting close to Allah, this is harming not only me, but it's also affecting my relationship with those around me, that is when it is time for you to take a step back. Take a step back. But if it's something that can be resolved, it's a conversation that can be had. Like another example that I like to give is, subhanAllah, as you guys are now have entered adulthood, right? The realization of knowing that your parents, or perhaps it can be one parent, or it can be both parents, they're getting older too. And realizing that a lot of their temperaments, a lot of what they've been carrying with them, the baggage that they've been carrying, it's a lot harder for them to change. Not that it's impossible for them to change. And this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala nurturing them as well. But the fact that your interaction with them, it gets more frustrating at times. It can get to you. And then it affects perhaps the way you speak to them, because now the tone in your voice is harsh. And you didn't want to be harsh. You wanted to have a very calm, level-headed conversation, but because they're stuck in their ways, all of a sudden you're like, it's trigger, essentially. And that is, again, a reminder that if it is starting to seep in your relationship, you take that initiative of stepping back, of taking that time away, and maybe perhaps coming back and having that conversation, right? So when we are talking about special nurturing, now that's us as Muslims. But now we're going to go back to general nurturing, which is what we've been discussing so far since last week. When we say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala nurtures us in a general way, it means, like I said earlier, that we're talking Muslims, non-Muslims, all creation. So we're going to really quickly, last time we had also covered certain ayahs from Surah Taha. So I'm just going to have you guys write it down. So inshallah, you guys can go back home and review it. But it was Surah Taha, ayahs 49 to 56. So it was like a paragraph of ayahs that we went through, and it was essentially the dialogue between Musa alayhi salam and Fir'aun. And so it was all about how Fir'aun literally asks, who is your God that you're speaking of? قَالَ فَمَنْ رَبُّكَمَا يَا Musa? That who is your Rabb that you're talking about, Musa? And then Musa in the next few ayahs explains who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. He is the one that guides you and me. So Musa alayhi salam essentially is pointing out straight up that, oh Fir'aun, Allah is guiding you too, by the way. Allah is nurturing you. And Fir'aun, and we talked about it last week, that how Fir'aun was also nurtured. He just didn't see it. Fir'aun was nurtured through Asiya. Because again, we talked about that the nurturing takes place when you have some sort of like conflict or disagreement, or you don't see eye to eye with someone. Did Fir'aun see eye to eye with Asiya? No. Asiya, first of all, wanted Prophet Musa, she wanted Musa alayhi salam to stay. She literally had the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in her heart, because she made that silent dua to Allah that, oh Allah, I want a house next to you in Jannah. So Asiya, and we know that she is in Islam, we consider her to be one of the most beloved women. And who was her husband? Fir'aun. So yes, Asiya as a believer was 100% nurtured, and she was nurtured in a special way. But Fir'aun was also nurtured. He was nurtured in a general way. Guidance was given to him as well, through his wife and then through Musa alayhi salam. Fir'aun was busy killing all those babies because he did not want anyone to overtake his reign. And somehow, of course, we know from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will and plan, one boy landed right at his doorstep, and he could do nothing about it. So, again, this is coming back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala nurturing even non-Muslims as well. Another form. So, we're now going to go into the stages of nurturing. And we talked about the first stage last week, and we're going to continue with this first stage. The first stage of general nurturing, so the tarbiyah al-aam, the first stage in itself is through creation. That Allah created every single individual, but also we get nurtured through that. Think about certain sicknesses. Think about certain things like when it comes to health, right? And I remember, I don't recall if I'm not sure if I brought it up last time or not, but let's take COVID, for example. Were we not nurtured during COVID? Not a single individual, when lockdown took place in March, first of all, not a single individual knew what was going on. No physician, no scientist, no researcher. Like they had these theories, the epidemiologists, like they were trying to figure it out, but they weren't 100% sure. It's because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was nurturing them as well, for them to really understand and grow and go through the process of what this could actually entail. What did this look like? And that's why there was shutdown. That lockdown was because of the fact that no one knew what it was about, except the knowledge was with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when it comes to the stages of Allah nurturing us, stage number one is the creation. I want us to think about, okay, so I talked a little bit about sickness. Let's talk about in health. When we talk about our skin, right? And how we take care of our skin, we have skin care, like we do our whole routine and everything. If you try out a new product, what do they normally say? Does anyone know? Like, what do they advise you? Okay, test it on your hand. Why? Okay, it can possibly, you don't know if it can actually, what kind of reaction it can have on your face. So they're like, oh, test it on your hand a little bit. What if you do end up applying it on your face, that skincare? A lot of the times, what do they say? That, oh, by the way, like say, for example, what is it that a lot of the times that sometimes people need to go on in order to clear out the acne? Accutane, right? What ends up happening first? It gets worse, the purging, exactly. It gets worse before it gets better. Are we in control of that? Of what's happening? Like, yes, okay, we're applying, we're taking the pills, we're obviously taking care of our diet or whatever, but are we in actual control? That is, and again, does this only happen to Muslims? No, it happens to everyone. The cell that goes ahead and regenerates, right? Now, scientifically, I don't know the exact amount, but we know that there's a certain number of days where then your new cells are going to go ahead, your skin cells are regenerating essentially. Are we in control of when acne pops out and when our skin is glowing? Are we in control of, say, for example, and a lot of the times when we think of when we're not feeling well, right? When we're sick, when we have a fever. How many times, like, I don't know about you guys, but like for me, like there's a lot of hair loss that takes place because my body is so weak in those moments. I'm trying to I take showers, I apply hair oil, but hair is falling. And it's because at the end of the day, what does this have to do with general nurturing? It's the reality, take it back to the definition of a Rabb, ownership. Do I own my hair then, essentially? Do I own my face, my body, what I put inside of it? No. But at the same time, what am I going to treat it as? I'm going to treat it as an amana. I'm going to treat it as that this is a trust from Allah and I'm going to take care of it. I'm not going to neglect myself, right? Now, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions about nurturing, we've now talked a little bit about us as human creation. I'm going to go into another creation that maybe perhaps we don't reflect on as much, and that's the mosquito. And it's because usually with mosquitoes, what do? You try to like smack it, kill it. How many of you all like mosquitoes really get to you? Yeah? Okay. What do mosquitoes like, how do they choose essentially their what's it called? Like their prospect of like who they want to go ahead and bite? What is it based off of? Your what? Not so much as your smell, your blood, the sweetness of your blood. So say, for example, right, it's summer, Texas heat, right? And you may not be someone that gets affected by mosquitoes. So what's the mosquito going to do? First, try it out. They're going to first numb the area, pierce it, and they're going to test to see that, okay, wait, is this person's blood sweet? And if it's not, you're probably just going to get that one bite. And then that's it. But someone who has sweet blood and it tastes good to them, what's going to happen? You've got more bites. And it affects them more. I bring the example of a mosquito, and it's because of the fact that their creation as well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran. And the way He describes it, subhanAllah, He describes in Surah Al-Baqarah that Allah does not shy away. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Allah does not shy away from using the example or the parable of a mosquito or what is even smaller. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is using this example for us to see and understand that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about faith, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about belief, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about control, He will give you an example of even a mosquito or something that is smaller, because He's in control of that mosquito as well. He is the one that has created this mosquito. So it's always important for us to know, and I'm going to say the statement in Arabic first and then translate it into English. At-tafakkur aqrabu tariq ilallahi ta'ala. If you want to get close to Allah, if you want to create some sort of like a shorter distance between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what should you do? Tafakkur. There's a difference between tadabbur and tafakkur. Tadabbur is us where we ponder, we're like talking about it, and we're like, oh, okay, I see it. Tafakkur is where you're thinking. That when I go outside, I'm thinking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I'm thinking about the trees, about the nature. SubhanAllah, again, that's why like when we have programs that include like any type of retreat, for example, or nature walks, I highly, highly recommend and encourage you all to go ahead and attend those. Of course, being in the masjid setting has its own beauty to it, has its own significance, right? And of course, we know that we're in the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We are surrounded by angels. But why are we restricting ourselves to just halaqas? Why not go outside and look at the nature, to feel that breeze, to go ahead and be grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to look at that water and to see its reflection in itself, to appreciate the steps that you're able to take. That is all the tafakkur that will help you get close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So I bring up the example of a mosquito because of that as well. That what we see, we're used to thinking like in one way, right? That, oh, I see objects, I see colors, I hear, I taste, I see. But mosquitoes, yes, they can see to an extent. They have 3 eyes. Or sorry, no, they don't have 3 eyes. They have 100 eyes, my bad. They have 100 eyes, but yet they will sense based off of the sweetness of someone's blood. That's when they attack. And that's kind of strange. But that's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala nurturing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala nurturing the individual that does have that sweet blood. So now, that was stage 1. I'm going to go into now stage 2. Stage 1 we just talked about, which is creation. And I gave 2 examples, right? Humans and how we're created and what happens, say, for example, when we're sick and when we're in health. And then the second I gave, which was a mosquito, which is so small. And like I said, a mosquito, we just want to swat it away. We don't want to have anything to do with it. But it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's creation. So what is stage number 2 of that general nurturing that every single person experiences? That second stage is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Al-Malik. He holds the kingship. He is the true owner. So anyone that is in a form of leadership, anyone that has a position of authority, always needs to be reminded that, wait a second, I am not the ultimate owner. I am not the ultimate leader. I'm not the ultimate king, right? And that goes for any stage in life. We talk about, say, for example, as parents, right? Sometimes we may hear from parents where they're just like, well, I'm your mom, and I said so. And you're trying to, again, when you're younger, it's different. But when you're older, you're like, okay, well, help me understand. Give me some sort of explanation. And they refuse. It's important to what? To have those conversations. Because at the end of the day, the reality is, and again, this is their tarbiyah as well. The reality is that they aren't above Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We're not above Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When we are put in positions where we have to go ahead and lead a team, we have to take care of a group, for example. We have to be aware of how we are speaking to each other. That akhlaq in itself, right? So that second stage that I'm talking about is that Allah owns everything and every single person is under Allah's nurturing. Every single person is under Allah's nurturing. So, you know how sometimes, especially when it comes to, let's say, elections, very fitting because, of course, our masjid is also having elections, right? And sometimes, like, you can feel the tension. I know that they've already made the announcement, but I don't want to know just yet. But before this, you can feel the tension. It's like this stress in the air and everyone's like a little uptight and they're just trying to like, yeah, we just want this to get finished and get over with, right? And some are worried, like, well, what's going to happen now? What's the future going to look like, right? But that's where we got to be careful. Don't worry. Don't worry of what's to come, because regardless, this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creating an environment for us all to be nurtured. Whether that be if we look at our local community, or we look at it as nationwide, or we look at it globally, right? So understand that when we're talking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Al-Malik, and that He has that kingship, we're talking about that He has the authority and He has that full control. Because think about it, a king, they believe that they have control, they have the power. A president, they believe they have the power. A leader, they believe they have money, they can do whatever they want. And yes, to a degree, that may be so, but it's limited into this dunya. That's why general nurturing, it's a reminder for us that, okay, yes, people may not be able to see it. Fir'aun, what did he say? He literally said, Ana rabbukumul a'la. That I am the Rabb, and I am the Most High. But that's obviously false, but that's what he assumed. And he thought he was the king. He thought he had the power. He thought he had the control, made sure that he was taking care of all those babies so that no one could overtake him. And what happened? What was his outcome? What ended up happening? So sometimes in moments, especially with everything that's happening around us, and we're like, how are people getting away with this, right? How is it that things have not changed and we're literally at the end of 2025, where social media has gone rampant with just the information and knowledge and exposure, and yet things haven't changed? This is where we have to realize that, wait, this is a test for us in this dunya. Because again, what did I say earlier, right? A beautiful life is not going to be a life where it's easy and everything is going smooth for us. Our special nurturing, and we're going to talk about that inshallah later on, it's different. It's not only specific, it's special. It's an honor. And it's an honor to be able to believe in La ilaha illallah and go through our life in that manner. So now, how do we deal with this? How do we deal with this concept of ownership? It's the fact that don't abuse what you have in your life, right? That's for us. That's a lesson for us. Because when we're talking about general nurturing, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, stage number 2, which is the fact that He is Al-Malik, He is the owner and the king. He has the full kingdom in His hands, quite literally. But for us, we should learn a lesson in the general way as well. Don't just jump straight to special. What is our lesson that we can learn through general nurturing? It's the fact that I'm not going to abuse whatever type of power I may have. So say, for example, yesterday with the high schoolers, we were talking about sibling dynamics, right? And so we were going into like, oh, okay, who's the eldest? Who's the younger one? Who's the middle child, right? And sometimes, like, I'll speak for myself because I'm the eldest, is that naturally, when you think you're the eldest, there may be moments where you're like, yeah, well, I'm the eldest. So you may kind of treat it in a way, well, yeah, you just have to because I'm the eldest. Of course, along with the eldest, there's also moments where there's levels where you have more responsibility. But the idea, that's a different story, and that's another type of nurturing, right? But I'm talking about abuse right now, right? Being in a position where you are above someone else, could be in terms of level of education, right? How many times Do people because you may not be as educated, you're looked down upon? Oh, you just graduated high school? Oh, okay. And then you're treated differently. It could be about where you were brought up, right? Oh, like say for example, you were brought up in that side of the city or of that side of the town, you're looked at differently. Even from country, right? Villages. Why? And again, this goes into a level of racism for sure, but I'm talking about, that's just an example. Let's take all across any position that you may have that you are above someone, always remember who put you in that role to begin with, and how are you going to treat this role? How are you going to behave in this role and position, right? So that is how we deal with it, is not taking it as a level of abuse where we are abusing that role or that position, but instead we're going to take it as that, okay, this is where I'm going to grow and benefit, and I will also help others. I will be able to take care of others as well. So now, okay, so another, actually, this will go into a little bit more. So I brought in an aspect of leadership. I'm now going to take this into ourselves, our bodies, right? Because I talked about a level of kingship, a level of ownership, and I talked about not abusing it. Okay, think about our menstrual cycle, right? Has anyone actually gone through the different phases of the menstrual cycle, essentially? Okay, what's the first phase, essentially? Or like one of the, okay, menstruation. Yes, the luteal phase, the follicular, and there's one more. Luteal, follicular, menstruation, ovulation. Exactly. So ovulation, follicular, and this is out of order, by the way, because I don't know the order myself. But if we had to research, okay, if we had to research, for example, how we're feeling at a certain moment, okay? So right before our menstrual cycle. Actually, let me just quickly pull it up because I feel like it's important. It's luteal, you're right, yeah. Okay, so right before we get our cycle, and we know we feel crummy, we look at ourselves, like it's the reality, right? We look at ourselves like, oh my gosh, I feel bloated, I feel like I gained weight, I feel like, and we start picking out at all these things. And when are we at like our high? It's usually between the follicular and ovulation. It's between that, where we're like, oh my gosh, like my skin's glowing, I feel great, I feel energized, I want to I just feel amazing, right? And you get this rush as well. Where is this all coming from? Where is this all coming from? It's the hormones that are in our body that who has control over? And say for example, sometimes we have variations in our cycle. Sometimes, say for example, there are those that if you have like PCOS, right? If you have other levels where maybe your menstrual cycle is not as consistent, all of that, literally, those are the moments where you are trusting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But you don't just leave it at that. You don't just leave it like, oh, I trust Allah, He's going to take care of my body, and you don't do anything. If, say, for example, if someone's diagnosed with PCOS, and which, by the way, I always like to say, like, mashallah, I know that Alma Sarah Ahmed, I'm sure you probably have heard of her, and Dr. Sarah Hamida, they have their Empower sessions, right? And they go through, as a woman, the certain things that happen in our body that maybe, that number one, are not talked about, that maybe, like, say, for example, we don't address, And yet, there are ways to navigate that. There are ways to go ahead and discuss, like, okay, if I am diagnosed with PCOS, what is it that I need to do? They're not just going to say, oh, well, trust Allah. No. There's a level of diet change. There's a level of lifestyle that needs to be changed. There's certain actions that you need to take. So now, what does that mean for us? How is this in relation to when I'm talking about that Allah is generally nurturing, and this is the second stage, that He is Al-Malik? It's because when we are facing this, never ever feel that this is a punishment from Allah. Never feel like, say for example, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to see the khair in these situations. But for example, infertility, right? And this is the fact of life in itself. And then we start saying that, oh, it's me, it's my body, and we start hating ourselves and feeling a sense of like this ugliness, right? That I'm the problem. And subhanAllah, inshallah, I feel like I genuinely hope that our cultures have been changing and things have been shifting. But I definitely know that there was a point where women, at least in the subcontinent, were then frowned upon, or that a person should not get married to this woman because, oh, she has fertility issues. Oh, she has, like her cycle is not regular, so don't get married to her. This is nurturing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and everyone in society needs to understand that. This is not only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala testing, but it's a means for that individual to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, understanding that He is Al-Malik. He is the true owner, the true king. And that goes, so I wanted to bring up our cycle because this may not be a regular for everyone. It may look differently for each and every individual. And even when we go through those stages, we'll start realizing that, okay, and I've seen like a lot of content as well, subhanAllah, I myself have learned so much of like what food should I eat, not like I follow it, which I should be, but like what food should I eat during which stage that is healthy, that will help me, right? I know like when it gets closer to our cycle, we're just like binging and just eating a whole bunch of junk food, or maybe that's me, but hey, and I'm not saying that, oh, don't do that, but it's just a realization of taking care of ourselves, right? Knowing that when we say in Surah Al-Fatiha, Alhamdulillah, Rabb al-Alameen, we are literally in that moment leaving our care and trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because we're saying, Alhamdulillah, Ya Allah, You are the Rabb of al-Alameen, the entire world, including what's happening to me. You are in control. You are in charge. So inshallah, we're going to stop here. As a reminder, we have just now covered the second stage of general nurturing. So we have not reached special nurturing yet. We still have another stage of general nurturing to get to, inshallah, and that we will cover next week, bidnillahi ta'ala. As always, we're going to go offline, inshallah, to share some reflections on anything that you may have either benefited from or you thought about as we were discussing today's session, inshallah. Jazakallahu khair, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Oh, okay. Like right now? Or? Okay. Alhamdulillah, that's fine. All right, so